Hey, colleagues. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Clocked In with your coach, MB. All things about the clock, guys. All things about the clock over here. So I just wanted to jump in today and share this conversation. First, I must take accountability for the fact that last week I was not clocked in myself and I had a lot of things come up and I had to reevaluate how I'm going to actually sort of schedule these conversations, these episodes, and all the things. And so instead of me doing the original plan of jumping on at Monday through Friday with you guys for lunchtime, because right now, with the things I have going on, my availability is kind of changing. And so I wanted to do something a little bit more realistic. So for right now, we're going to say on every Tuesday and Thursday, we will be clocked in. And if I can jump in and give you guys some extras, maybe, maybe you'll see it in a various different ways. A few shorts, we'll see how things go. But for right now, until further notice, I will be here on Tuesdays and Thursdays, clocked in with you at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, so that we can talk about all the things about the clock. So today, as you can see in the title, I want to talk about something that impacts all of us at some point in some way. And hopefully after listening to this video, not only will you be empowered to know how you can better handle this particular thing happening to you, but also you will be more careful, about your own words, which is always the goal here when it comes to my colleagues, right? So we're talking about today, as you see in the title, we're talking about this juicy, juicy, juicy thing that everybody loves to some degree or another, called gossip. Okay, so let's get into it. Gossip. You ever be in a work situation and somebody says something about somebody else that you thought was just a little strange, a little harsh, maybe some information you shouldn't have been privy to, or maybe you just jump right in. Maybe you enjoyed every single bit of it. Maybe you were the person on the receiving end of that juicy, juicy gossip. And you, instead of it being about someone else, you heard that maybe your coworker, maybe your neighbor, maybe a church friend or a family member, especially in the case that you have been on the receiving end of, being the focus, the topic in some hot gossip at work. Let's talk about that. And especially if it involves one of your leaders or someone in authority who could actually have a negative impact on how you're viewed, or people's, like I said, how you view people's impression of you or your opportunities for promotion, various different things. And again, this goes across the board. So everything that I'm about to share in regards to the workplace, you can copy and paste this on every aspect of your life to some degree. And I'll kind of touch on those. But I want to touch on how this thing plays out when it comes to you being able to sue people for what we call gossiping. So a lot of times when when people are talking and they're spreading gossip, a lot of times they're spreading information that is not true, right? Or it's not totally true, right? It's not factual. It may be their feelings, it may be their opinion, it may be a third wind, meaning they got it from somebody else or they played telephone and now they're spreading something about you that is just not true. As much as we can think that gossiping about people and just finding other people as the something to talk about is innocent, inconsequential, and harmless, it is not. It is extremely, extremely harmful. Not only does it hurt people's feelings, but it can hurt people's reputations. And it can also hurt people's opportunities. It can cause people to, like I said, not be able to not end up getting some promotion they were going to get, or not getting, to move to a different department that they were hoping to move to. It can, harm people in various different ways, in job opportunities as a whole. And then of course it can play out in other ways, like I said, other parts of your life, too, right? Somebody gossiped about you in your personal life, and now somebody doesn't want to be your friend, or somebody doesn't want to, do business with you, or somebody doesn't want to, rent to you in a future, opportunity, or somebody doesn't want to, it can be so many things, so many ways that this can impact your life, right? So here's how this thing works. First of all, let me state that I'm not not one of hiding my spiritual beliefs when it comes to any aspect of life or anything I'm involved in. I'm a firm believer in the Word of God, in the Bible. So I want to say too, for those who are believers, we all know that, that it is not only unlawful, or it's not only a risk law when it comes to the legal aspect or concerns around gossiping, but we know that it's wrong spiritually. I just want to put that out there. Proverbs 11:23 seals the deal. It says a man who gossips betrays confidences. And you want to understand that should never happen. We should always be trustworthy, especially with confidential information. Beyond that, let's get back into the law, the legal concerns. So four things I want to point out that can often happen that get a little that make the whole little gossiping, juicy gossip thing a little tricky, right? Can get you in some legal trouble. And that is, first of all, the fact that it can be what you want to call IIED. What does that mean? Intentional infliction of emotional distress, right? Um, and what that means is you said something about a person that has now caused them some level of emotional distress. Now, when it comes to law, it has to be pretty egregious. It has to be pretty severe, right? In order for you to actually have a case when it comes to, trying to, sue someone or, deal with someone, who's gossiped about you and caused you emotional distress. What I do want to clear up, though, is that there's a lot of confusion around the words intentional. People tend to think that intentional in the courtroom, but when it comes to law, means the same thing as intentional as like, I intentionally put on a red shirt today. No, it means that you did something that any reasonable person would have assumed was going to cause a certain impact. So considering which, you want people to consider you to be a reasonable person, it means that you are, as a reasonable person, should have been aware of the fact that you sharing the information you shared or could have caused a certain impact on a person. Okay. And so it just has to make sense. It just has to make sense that if I went and told, if Sally came to me at lunch and told me that she failed a drug test, or some kind of, whatever the situation is. And I go and start telling people, oh, she failed the drug test. Oh my gosh, she failed a drug test. She failed a drug test. And I go and start spreading that kind of business about her. I, as a reasonable person, should have assumed that was going to have a negative impact on her once she found out, right? And even if she didn't find out, it's still impacting her. She just doesn't know it because now people are thinking she has some kind of big issue, right? And especially if you're a manager, that can cause all kinds of other problems because then that can get into what you call, public disclosure of personal facts. Right? If you share that kind of information about an employee, well, I had to get rid of her because she failed her drug test, or I had to get rid of her because she, whatever the case is, or she's sick all the time, or she has, this disease or that condition, or whatever the case is. That can get into another thing I was going to address, which like I just said, is called public disclosure of personal facts. You cannot willy-nilly talk about all people's business and think that it's just going to be no big deal. That's inconsequential, especially in the workplace. People show up to work, and as I've said before, we all need to be able to feel safe and valued and appreciated in our work environments. And sharing that kind of information is not conducive to an employee feeling safe, okay, in their work environment. Now, all that aside, I want to talk about another one that I think a lot of people are very unaware of. Matter of fact, I know people are, because I've had to tap a few people on their shoulders in my lifetime and say, listen, I could file a lawsuit against you for under this particular tort law. What am I referring to? I'm referring to false light invasion of privacy. What does that mean? A lot of people think, oh, well, it's true, so therefore I can gossip about it. Oh, well, I didn't tell a lie. What I said was true. Well, here's the catch to that. If you share some information about a person that although it may be true, if you share it about the person in an effort to, or in a way that can put them in a bad light, then you have now violated or committed this civil crime, not civil crime, but broken the civil law, if you will, called, like I said, it's a tort law, but it's called false light invasion of privacy. And that means you took a fact about somebody, but you used it and you stated it or you published it and shared it in a way that can put a person in a bad light. That, my dear, is not acceptable. That is not how this thing works. That's not how any of this works. I'm always quoting that because I love that little old lady who made that little Facebook video or commercial. But I just want to, I just wanted to share this, with you guys because like I said, a lot of people gossip. I'm a person who doesn't take it very lightly. I'm always, as I've shared with you guys, be excellent, always be about your business, always make sure that you're doing what's right and be prepared to deal with those who don't reciprocate. You have to understand these potential risks when it comes to gossiping. Like I said, not only should we not do it on a just out of a moral and respectful and just out of good character and everything, but we should also do it out of making sure that we are not putting ourselves at risk of violating people's rights in one of these particular ways and putting ourselves at risk of somebody filing a lawsuit against us. I myself have had to file defamation of character cases against people. I'm more than happy to do it. People work too hard. We as people, should I say, we work too hard to be what we need to be. We work too hard to stay out of trouble, keep our names, out of all the mess and everything, to let someone else come along and defame our character. Even if we're not perfect, guess what? I get to pick and choose what I'm not going to be perfect at, and you don't get to make up things about me just because you're having a bad day or you don't like me. So what does that mean? That means that as the next thing on my list that I was going to say is defamation of character, as I just somewhat mentioned. Defamation of character. What does that mean? That means you stated something about someone that is false. And the very risky thing about defamation of character is it doesn't have to be published. It doesn't have to be some big deal. It doesn't have to be something that, went to any specific person. It can literally be one person that you shared this information with, or you made this, lie up about me to, or, or we were in a public setting and you said this with other witnesses or someone else, present, and you made up a lie or you made a statement that could cause a negative impact to my reputation, and especially if it involves any kind of interference with like a contract or anything that could benefit the person, because now you're looking at a person being able to sue you for what am I trying to say? Compensatory damages, meaning what would I have made had you not ruined that contract for me? For example, working in real estate, if a person defames you and they cause a negative impact, or they're trying to misrepresent you and share some bad information about you and cause you to lose a contract with a client or, broker, whatever the situation is, then a person can, like I said, can take steps to sue you for what you call compensatory damages, meaning you need to compensate me for what I would have had you not committed this, very, terrible act against me of defaming my character. Bottom line is, guys, gossip it can cost you something. And I encourage you guys to not only check the links below. I'm going to, as I tend to do, I'm going to post the laws that apply in the comments below or in the description below. And I want you to study this stuff out, guys. As I tell you, I want you to stay empowered. I want you to stay ready. I want you to know what to know. And so in the event that somebody defames your character, it can be a simple thing. It can be something as simple as you had a fallout. Let's talk about personal, it doesn't even have to be a work situation. I had to file a defamation of character case against someone in a very personal situation who decided that they were going to do a lot of this, not knowing, not understanding apparently the risks that they were taking and how, the consequences that, could come along with it. And I had to file a defamation of character case against them. And it's very simple. You go down, you pay the fee, you fill out the form, you file the case, and you make sure you do what I always tell you guys here, which is document. And I'm going to say this too. anytime you are in a situation that makes you feel uncomfortable, if you are dealing with what you'll see in one of my next videos soon, what I like to call EPD, you know what that is? Expensive personality disorders. What does that mean? People who don't know how to act, people who are belligerent, people who are unprofessional, people who are ignorant, people who are deceitful, all the various different things. Whenever you're dealing with, and I'm going to make that video, whenever you're dealing with those kind of people, guys, I want you to make sure that you have a very, very well working recorder on your phone. Because at any point, as I often tell people, anytime you're talking to me, this conversation could be being recorded for quality and training purposes. What does that mean? That means I may or may not be recording that conversation. And we can get it with further into that because it is kind of based on what state you live in, what the laws are, and how and whether or not the recordings that you do get, make of a conversation can or cannot be entered into a court case for what you call, discovery or as cooperation, and those kinds of things. So you want to be aware of, what your state laws are, and I'll make another video about that at some point. But you have to stay ready, guys. Like, keep your journal. I was going to bring my journal so I can show it to you guys during this video. Document, document, document. I don't care what it is. You would be surprised how just keeping a good record of things that happen can make a case that you file against someone so extremely easy. Done deal. You know why? Because credibility counts, because consistency counts, and because criminals always leave trails. You understand what I'm saying? They leave clues. People have, like they say, we're creatures of habit. People have a tendency to build cases against themselves just by way of being who they are. And again, what I'm going to call, what I made up over here, guys, is, like I said, what I'm going to call expensive personality disorders. It's a reality. You'd be surprised just how many people just genuinely don't know how to act. And something about the way they've chosen to do life, it's just expensive. It just puts them in a position where when they're dealing with the wrong people at the right time, it can put them in some very challenging situations. So anyway, guys, that's what I want to share about gossip. Like I said, I'm going to put the laws in the description below. I encourage you to research it. Know what to know. So when you hear it, and don't just take my word for it. Like I said, research the laws, understand, dig deep, look, read through some cases around these things, I will say with IIED, because a lot of times people say, oh, emotional distress or emotional, she caused me emotional. That's a term that people use a lot. I'm sorry, there's a term people use a lot for it, and I'm not recalling it to mind right now. But, a lot of time, emotional distress or emotional something, I forget what it is. But basically, when people want to claim that something impacted them emotionally, again, it probably did. And, it depends on, what, and again, your feelings are always valid. Now, how well you can prove that is a whole different story. But like I said, the very interesting and great thing about how emotional impact, or in IIED, intentional emotional distress, how it plays out in court is it reasonable that this action would have caused a person emotional harm, okay, to the degree, that it would make sense in court. Now, this is what you call that particular tort is what you call restatement. And so it's not necessarily binding. It's not an absolute, in other words. It actually means that it is something that has been, that was studied by the American Law Institution. And it is a form of law that comes about after, through reviewing what is played out in many different courtrooms, right? And so it's kind of like precedents, but it's not binding. Like I said, like precedents is binding. This is what the new, law is because of, this particular precedent. It's a little bit different, but it's still very firm. It's still something that, like I said, you can use in your court case. If not alone, it can oftentimes be, sort of added on, added into another claim that you have. But anyway, I just wanted to share that with you guys. Keep that in mind. And like I always tell you guys, document, document, document. It never gets old. You will never have to stop doing it. And if you stay ready, you'll never have to get ready. And I'm going to throw this in real quick behind what I just said about documenting. I remember one time, and maybe I need to tell more stories too, when I do these episodes. But I remember one time I had a court case where I had to sue a company, pretty large or very, very large organization, to be honest. And my attorney is very, very powerful, very, one of the top attorneys in the nation, just a very, very powerful man who I personally, honestly could not afford. However, because he took my case pro bono by way of this, by way of that. He took my case pro bono. And so that allowed me to afford him. If you want to know more about pro bono, I can do a video on that at some point in case you don't understand it. Put it in the comments if you want to know more about pro bono, what that means, and sort of how you can even negotiate cases like that in some cases. But here's the deal. So I had documented the incident that I was suing for, and we won, and it was a very swift case, thank God. But I had documented it so well that when he had me to help him write my deposition, he was literally mind blown. And so I say that to say, you do half the work. You are a walking threat. You are one of the most powerful people walking this earth. And I will say that firmly because I understand how these things play out, not just by way of my situations, but by way of observation and hearing things and seeing the situations where people can't prove a thing because you didn't document. But but like I said, it makes you a very empowered, it makes you a very powerful individual because you document. Keep you a journal, write down things, weird things that happen, consistent things that happen, situations, all of your personal stuff, something you go through in a day. Document, document, document. Okay. That is your power. That is make documentation one of your superpowers. Okay. And like I said, if you stay ready, you will never have to get ready. I thank you guys so much for joining me. Stay ready, stay aware, and always stay clocked in over here. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Um, Actually, I'm sorry. See you guys on Thursday. Like I said, I'll be on here on Tuesdays and Thursdays for the time being. And I want to hear what you guys have to say in the comments. If you have a work story, drop it in the comments. If you want to make it private, send me an email, clockedinwithmb@gmail.com. And I would love to hear your story. I'd love to, correspond with you and learn more about, exactly what's going on and offer any kind of support that I can. But drop it in the comment. Have you ever been through a situation that involved gossip? Share here, with all the other viewers what happened? How did your story play out? How did you handle it? Or maybe it's something current that you're trying to figure out. Let's get clocked in together, guys. I thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will see you on Thursday for the next episode of Clocked In with your girl MB. Have a good day.